I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to filter in. Okay, for those of you who've joined us, I'm just going to give everyone another minute or so to filter in, and then we'll get going. And then while you're waiting, I'm going to get a welcome poll launched just to know who we have joining us today. Okay. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. To start off, welcome to the High Five Prepping for Success on the AP Tests webinar today, where we're going to discuss the AP exams and how your students can be getting ready for them. My name is Taryn, and I am an academic and test prep mentor here at ESM Prep, but have been in the education realm for roughly 10 years. I'm going to turn it over to my co-hosts here to introduce themselves, and we'll start off with Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Krell II. I have to use that name legally. I'm also an academic and test prep mentor with ESM. I have been in this space for about 20 years.
Hi, I'm Phil. I as well am an academic and test prep mentor. I have been at ESM for over 8 years now.
Perfect. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And thank you for those of you who filled out that poll. It's really helpful in letting us know who our audience is. It looks like we have mostly parents here who are checking in on their students and what their students need to be doing to be successful on these tests. Diving in, we just want to address like why take AP exams and what use are they for your students. Biggest thing is exposure to that college core curriculum. A lot of the AP exams are mimicking the intro level college courses that students might experience, and so they're getting early exposure and are able to see what college curriculum might look like in the rigor, but in a more controlled high school environment spanning across the school year instead of in a semester. Other skills that are built up by these AP courses are more intense academic and study skills. Some students aren't developing as intense study skills, although I think we're trending towards more academic rigor as time has gone on. And in addition to that, some test prep skills, as these AP exams are structured in very specific ways that we're able to target in prep with students or through their coursework in those AP exam courses. Another aspect that is a little bit more rare is college admissions. Some schools will look at your AP scores for college admissions purposes. Largely, these schools are more so if you're applying internationally. A lot of US-based schools are looking more so at your ACT or SAT scores, but some schools might consider your AP scores depending on a student's college admissions profile. And then most importantly, we get college credits if we get certain scores on those AP exams, which helps students to get out of those courses that might be more general credits that they are not aiming to pursue in their degree, or maybe they can get ahead on their degree path.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk for a couple minutes just about, what it means to get a five. How do you do that? And what does that entail, right? Um, the fact of the matter is classwork does not always, how well you doing in your course does not always necessarily correspond to how well you do on these exams. These exams are, designed in a very particular fashion, and sometimes that pushes students' understanding beyond just their ability to solve problems, on homework assignments or even on exams or quizzes in class. These are big exams, they're lengthy. There's obviously anxiety wrapped up with it. There's a lot of factors that go into doing well on these exams. And I think sometimes students are kind of a bit tricked into just being comfortable with, oh, I'm doing well on this course, so I'll do fine on the exam. Um, there's also just the fact that some teachers won't really teach the AP exam formats. They will teach the content, but they won't teach how the courses, or sorry, how the exams will ask questions, right? What type of language and terminology and vocab do they use? How do they link ideas together? There's a lot of things that go into these exams that sometimes teachers don't really cover very well. So it's really crucial for your child to be talking with their mentor or reflecting on, this is what I'm learning. How does this relate to the way in which exams are, actually given? And then another thing, which sounds kind of weird, the curriculum does change, and oftentimes teachers don't do a great job. Well, I don't want to say often. It can be the case that teachers won't do a great job keeping up with those curriculum changes. As an example that that hit me very, 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 crucially last year with AP Physics 1, there was a new unit added to the course, and a lot of teachers just failed to cover that unit before the exam rolled around. So I had a lot of students coming to me saying, I haven't studied this at all. I have no idea what any of this is. So those are all like things for students and your children to keep in mind as they're starting to prepare for these exams. We can go to the next slide, I think. I wanted to highlight a couple of so my specialty is in the STEM region, and so I can only really speak to those types of courses very fluently. But I wanted to highlight a couple of cases here that I find very interesting and very instructive. AP Stats and AP Environmental Science. Those are two courses that are often considered or have this perception of being the easy math and easy science courses. But if you look at the percentage of students who get fives year over year, they're often, if not almost always, the lowest percentage. Um, there's probably a lot of ways to explain this, but I like highlighting this because I think students will often just kind of take these for granted that, oh, it's AP stats, it's not AP calculus, how hard can it be? Or AP environmental science, how hard can it be? And then the stark reality is that students don't do very well when it comes to earning fives on those courses compared to the other science and math courses. Um, and you can see here, I mean, getting a five, we have this chart here. Getting a five is not impossible, right? For the sciences, the average percentage of fives, this is just for last year's data, is just shy of 20%, right? The math and computer sciences is, just about 23%, give or take. So students definitely earn fives on these, but the question is what goes into that? How much prep, how much work went into that? And I think that's what we're really trying to emphasize and highlight today. Thank you, Taryn.
So I'll jump into the humanities sections of the exams. Humanities tends to include your histories, your literature, and your languages. In general, they overlap as far as format, but there are some specific differences between them, of course, because there are certain things you will cover in certain languages that you won't cover in literature. One of the big things that is considered as the big structural consistencies is passage-based reading comprehension. That's a skill set that we are starting to build from third grade often on up. And this is big on the AP exams. A lot of times you will see questions that are rooted in single passages or stimulus of some sort, especially in history. Sometimes the passage may be an actual image and not necessarily words. So there's different ways to kind of strategize and think about how to approach applying comprehension skills and strategies. But at the first and foremost, the whole test is a vocabulary test. I don't know if anyone will ever disagree with me that if you don't know what they're talking about, it's very hard to access these questions. And that goes across, I think, content areas. But it's very important for people to kind of study and build the vocabulary and the terminology that is specific to the curriculum that they're preparing to take the exam for. And that's how you kind of can knit together the different concepts and see how they're asking you to conceive of what's right and what makes an answer choice definitely wrong. So as you break through the questions or break down the questions and deconstruct the ideas that are being presented to you and say, okay, so which of these answer choices actually rises to the top? You have to know what makes an answer choice wrong as well. And that really helps to come to realize how much you have to practice the strategies that are also separate from just building your conceptual understanding. All of that kind of comes together as far as being of top importance, right? They're equally important. So that goes to the other structure. It's multiple choice, and there's also free response. Free response can include short responses, right? Something that's no more than 2 to 3 sentences, and long responses that require evidence. Fortunately, because the word essay is a little bit of a misnomer. It just kind of implies multiple paragraphs, which is absolutely the case. But they're closer to being constructed responses, where on the rubric they'll tell the students exactly what to include in their essay, and then you organize the requirements and the essential elements into multiple paragraphs. That makes it a much simpler approach, which when you're in classes, as Philip brought up before, teachers might have different expectations. Very often they go above and beyond what's expected in the rubric. And you want to be more precise as you're preparing for the exam specifically. Not necessarily that it's not a good thing to build your knowledge base and work and strategize so that you can have as much of a substantive response as possible, but you're also being timed. So, with that in mind, substance over length. That's always going to be important. So practicing those free responses is about really being precise with in having the necessary elements. And then with other certain specific languages, you might actually have like a speaking or listening that you don't have in other tests. So those are just things to think about that might be a little specific to the exams on the humanities side, but overall, they tend to have that structure and to cover a lot of these same ideas in different ways throughout the questions.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to speak, briefly about the STEM exams. There's a few things that you can probably see. There's a lot of overlap in the bullet points that we have here relative to what Kevin was just speaking about. So I won't cover necessarily everything. I want to add a couple of things that are kind of, particular to the STEM exam. So first thing, passage-based reading comprehension. That sounds weird to be, putting that as the first bullet point on the STEM exam, but it's crucial. And this is something that it's kind of hard to teach. It's one of those things where students need practice with it. They need to get they need to get their hands dirty, and that can take time. And so we have we have a discussion at the end of this talking about the timeline, and the long and short of it is they need to start soon, right? They need to start early because learning how to identify the key components in a passage. I mean, on the STEM exams, the passages are relatively short nonetheless, but it's still really, really important for a student to be able to tease out the important details and find the core components to the question. Another kind of odd point that might seem odd, at least, is the vocabulary building. Well, this really goes back to what are called the task verbs. So for every STEM exam, there will be a list of tasks verbs, and they're different across each exam. There's a lot of overlap between them, but the important thing is to know what those different task verbs are asking the student to do. The classic example I always bring up is the difference between sketching and plotting. So if, for example, if they ask you to sketch something, you don't necessarily need to include a scale. You don't necessarily need to include numbers or values. You just need to show the rough structure of some, relationship between two variables. Whereas a plot, you need to actually show a scale and values, right? That might seem obvious, in hindsight, but if a student isn't explicitly shown that or doesn't dig into that, that's an area where they can miss points, right? It's also an area where they could save themselves some time if they're asked to sketch and they end up going and plotting something. And there's a variety of different task verbs for every test, and it's just really, really important to make sure that the student understands exactly what they mean and exactly what's expected of them. On top of that, vocab building could kind of manifest itself in the sense that a student needs to understand, not only the key terms from the course itself, but how, different, language structure works. And so how these different components and concepts can be related and what they're asking of the student. Um, Similarly with essay and constructed response writing, again, it's pretty short, in the grand scheme of things, but knowing how to construct a response that actually addresses the prompt and actually includes what the prompt is asking for. These are skills that I, again, don't feel like you can just teach really quickly. They need to be practiced and worked on for, over time. Um, with the STEM exams, to varying degrees, you have mathematical reasoning, right? So certain courses like in environmental science, there's not necessarily a ton of mathematical thinking per chance, but other courses might have more. And so a student really should be comfortable with, not just the formulas that exist on in the class, but how they're utilized, when they're utilized, what they're telling the students, what the, really what they mean, right? Not just how to calculate, right? That's oftentimes the calculation itself is the easiest part, but what is it telling you, and when to use it? Those are the difficult aspects. And then the last component, scientific inquiry methodology. This is huge. This is kind of the kind of through line that runs throughout the entire exam, right? What does it mean to do science? What does data, tell you, and what may it not tell you, which is maybe even more important. Um, and making sure students understand how to construct good experiments, how to critique and analyze experiments that are, given to them as examples. And then again, what they can learn or glean from the results of those experiments. All of this is, again, just built into all of these exams and really shows up in the free response areas very, very acutely. And I think it's something that isn't immediately intuitive to most students. So, depending upon how much they practiced in their course with their teachers, this might be something that is kind of, pretty new and fairly foreign to them. And it's really important to do well in these exams that you're comfortable with those ideas. So
Perfect. Thank you, Phil. I'm just going to briefly spend some time on some of the other AP exams. We put these into a broad category because they do break the trend from our normal AP Humanities or AP STEM exams as far as structure. When I say the other AP exams, I'm really referring to our AP Arts courses. There's a variety of arts courses that are offered, or our AP Capstone Diploma program, which includes AP Research and AP Seminar. Now, these are the types of exams that might not be offered at schools. They're the first ones to be cut as far as ability to teach or just offerings. But these exams really highlight long-term project management skills for students. So these are you're putting together a portfolio, an arts portfolio, or you're putting together what they call performance tasks for the research and the seminar courses. And these exams really aim on self self-regulated research and essay writing and deliverables that you're putting together in order to accomplish the goals of the course. Another big aspect of these other AP exams is they do generally have different due dates than an actual sit-in exam. Some of them do have an exam that you take and that you answer some questions for, but a lot of them have a portfolio, whether it be art-based or performance tasks that you're submitting on different deadlines than that exam might be taking place. These exams are really what I consider higher level of you're giving a student a project management task to go through and to fulfill. And so these are something that's really helpful for building that individualistic path towards their education and their own scholarship and are helping them to explore something that they might have a deeper interest in long term. Anything to add on the other exams, Phil or Kevin?
not really.
Okay. And after kind of overviewing the types of exams, we'll transition into how you can get your student ready for those exams. So I'll let Kevin take it away.
Yeah, as Bill mentioned earlier, which is a really important point, a lot of teachers either just don't have the time or just don't really dig into the exam prep because it's very different from content delivery and curriculum delivery. So, very often, because of the density of the information, you want to start And we can't stress that, strongly enough. You need to start as soon as possible. But what that means, if you start earlier, it doesn't need to be a drawn out process. It can be as much as just incorporating a little bit of multiple choice strategy and practice into your everyday study for as you do your homework, as you prepare to understand the material and the content, apply it to the test format. That's what it helps to prep you early. And then you don't have to dig into the timing and simulating until, well, no, later. Some might argue, winter break and on might be a good time to get started thinking about timed practice. But you want to be targeted and you don't want to overwhelm yourself because test fatigue is very real. So be strategic, make a plan, update your plan as needed to accommodate everything else you have to kind of think about and worry about, because some tests are more involved than others. Some may require way more strategic or precise preparation than some others who kind of their their types overlap so much or their strategies overlap that prepping for one is somewhat prepping for the other. A few that come to mind as very specific are like the English literature exam, AP Chinese, or even like the AP calculus exams. They're very specific in the way that they need to be approached as you prepare for the exam itself. So you want to make sure that you're not just content ready, because you have to align that content to the test format. That also means practicing the FRQs as well. This may not seem as pertinent because you often will do it in classes periodically and you don't need to do a whole lot of them, but you want to be as familiar with the rubric and meeting the demands and expectations as much as possible as you can. So part of that is going to be involved in your plan and in your preparations. And again, starting early means you can take it slowly, look at different pieces, talk with your teachers offline if they don't have a lot of time in class to give you a lot of expectations or preparations. You can see them offline when you are aligning your own prep with what they can give you as far as advice. So the key is they're going to be just finding times offline on your own to practice and practice and practice some more. So that's why executive functioning and all these other skills can be very important, because you have to kind of structure your own time outside of class for a lot of AP exams. That's what helps prepare you in many ways for the college experience, because that's what it is in college. That's very much the alignment. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll take over timeline. And so something that's really important is we say to start that exam prep early, and we've kind of outlined a very general timeline for a student prepping for those exams coming up in May. We are now here in November of 2025, and one thing that I did want to outline first up is that there is an AP exam registration deadline for any students that might be self-studying for an exam or taking an AP equivalent course that they want to take the AP exam for later on in the school year. This deadline is November 15th. One thing that's really interesting about that deadline is that it is a Saturday, and you do need to coordinate with your exam coordinator at your school, your specific high school. And so I would recommend having those conversations prior to November 14th, so that you don't miss the deadline because it ends up on a weekend. You'll really only need, if a student is already taking an AP course and is registered in that course, they will automatically be registered for the AP exam. So this is really only something you need to do if your student is taking an AT level course or an equivalent college level course that they want to take the AP exam alongside if they choose to do so, or even if they're self-studying. We have some students that have elected to self-study and take these AP exams as well. The other recommendation we make is we're a good chunk of the way into the school year and a student is still learning the content, and we recommend that they continue to absorb the content to the best of their ability, whether that be through their coursework with their teacher, or if they're really struggling, we recommend that you get a mentor in there to help further support their learning. Looking towards the future and kind of as we head into the new year, we recommend following winter break, it needs to be begin reviewing the comprehensive content for the course. These courses are not something that you can start to cram for a few weeks before and expect to get that 5 if that's what they're aiming for. And so beginning that comprehensive content review, going back to the earlier units after winter break, and we know lots of students taking winter break to be a break, and they are losing some of that foundational course content they might have learned earlier on in the course. And then building out that study plan early on. So starting after winter break, building out what a study plan can look like heading into their new year and eventually their exams later on in May, or is something that we recommend doing post winter break. If a student is so busy and they just don't have as like a ton of time to input into the studying, we recommend that at the very latest they start by March, that they are putting in more study time and trying to build that into their schedule where possible. And we say start that intensive study in March is really can apply to students who are busy and or students who have been studying but not sticking to their study plan. It's a good update checkpoint for that study plan. And then when we get to the actual exams in May, those exams run May 4th through May 15th. Some schools that might run later into the school year may have auxiliary dates that they are offering, but that is dependent on the school. And then if a student has to miss a specific AP exam date for any reason, there are makeup dates that are very specific. But that is something that you need to work with your school and with your AP teacher in order to coordinate if a student will miss an exam for any reason. Another thing that I wanted to outline, just highlighting those other AP exams, is the portfolio or performance task-based courses do have different due dates. And the earliest, some of those due dates fall within that May 4th through 15th and are on the exam days of those exams. But there is an earlier due date for your AP digital portfolios for your project-based courses, and that's largely your AP research or AP seminar of April 30th. So a little bit earlier than the actual AP exams. Overall, we're trying to capture a timeline that is general for any student and could work for any student. However, we do recommend that with every student being different and having different levels of needs, that we work on a more catered timeline. And that's something that our mentors can do, or you can work with your student to try to develop based on what you know about them. Anything to add on the timeline, Phil or Kevin?
The only thing I'll add, and it's not exactly timeline per se, but it's kind of along these lines, is if you think about, when your student starts the course, maybe, in September or late August, they don't take these exams until May of the following year. And by the time the exams come around, there's such a huge gap between what the content that the time they saw the first content and when they're currently going to be taking the exam, that original content might be far removed from their memory. And so it's really, really important to make sure that, even if you did well with that material, that they kind of reflect on that and say, like, okay, it's been a long time since I did X, right? And I've been spending the last 2 months working on Y. So it's, starting early helps mitigate some of those issues, right?
100%. Yeah. Okay. This brings us to kind of nearing the end of the content that we have for you today, but we just wanted to outline the things that we offer here at ESM Prep. And if you would like to get in contact with us, I'll keep this QR code up for a few minutes. But this QR code will take you to our inquiry link where you can get a hold of our client services team or you can call our client services team number that's also provided here. But one thing that we do that we specialize in here at ESM Prep is AP or test prep and academic mentors is the ability to build these plans for your students and help guide them through the process of studying that course content and revisiting those foundational concepts that it's been months since they've started on early on in the school year. And through that, we can help them master that course content. More time with course content is something that most students could use to help with that further mastery. And so we aim to build that in. And then one thing that some teachers do miss is understanding that exam structure and the expectations. I can speak for some of the AP STEM exams specifically, but there are action verbs, and I know that Phil touched on a few of those that students need to know how to approach, and that's where their points are coming from as they approach those questions and those action verbs. And so being able to understand how the exam is going to be structured, reduce some of that stress and anxiety going into it is something that can be helpful for students. And is something that we can help to support. And then lastly, practice. This is something that Kevin touched on as one of the study strategies, but practice, I think was listed as one of our study tips. Practice not only exam style questions and content, but the timing of those questions so that students are not feeling that level of stress and anxiety that might overwhelm them day of that test. Anything else that you want to add on, Kevin or Phil, on what we can offer as mentors?
Nothing specifically regarding that, but we do have a question that we probably should address.
Oh. Perfect. We can jump into the questions, and I'll leave this up while we do so. But you're welcome to use the Q&A feature that we have for any questions, and we'll keep the webinar open for a few minutes after that last question, if there's anything lingering. Okay. I see a question about registering for the AP Psych exam. So that's something that you do need to go through your school and your AP exam coordinator. If you're not sure who that AP exam coordinator is, your administration at your school should be able to guide you in that right direction. Especially, it looks like took a summer course and is wanting to take the AP exam for that summer course. Yeah, I highly recommend touching base with the school today to hopefully get that registration through by the end of the week so that that student can take that AP exam come May. Okay. And we'll take any other questions anyone might have as well. And we'll again leave the webinar open here for a few minutes as those questions come in. But if all of your questions have been answered, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday and a good rest of your week as we head into the holidays and the quickly end of the semester. Feels like a blur so far.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. It's great.